Hey. Hi. It's Dave. Nice to have you here on the How to Podcast series. We are back again. I have a co-host yet again. I love having co-hosts on the show. This one, interestingly, is my guest co-host today is a listener of the How to Podcast series. Insert applause here. Yes. It's so cool. I get the chance to talk to one of you. Lindsay's on the podcast. Lindsay Polic is on, and we're going to talk about her podcast. She came on to talk about the How to Podcast series. She came on to talk about her podcast journey. She is a podcaster. She has a podcast all around health and safety. Like, what an important topic, right? For any business owner, any company, you need to be really on top of your safety game for your employees' sake. So a great podcast, The Safety Gambit. And we're going to talk about social media ideas. We're going to talk about guesting questions and some thoughts around guesting and finding guests. The use of SpeakPipe on your website to generate engagement with your audience. Hiring an editor and finding a mentor. Outsourcing your editing, and just audience building and growth ideas. A lot to cover, and we really flew through these, so make sure you check out the show notes for our summary, our recap of our discussion. And we're really excited to have Lindsay on the podcast. And again, it's so cool to sit down with a listener and kind of unpack what this podcast means for her, and to get some perspective on maybe how we can make this podcast even better. So join with me as we welcome Lindsay to the podcast here on the How to Podcast series. So great to have you here, Lindsay. Here we go. Okay, welcome to the How to Podcast series. Joining me today is my friend. And I can say that, right? Because we are all friends here in podcast world. Lindsay is joining me today. Lindsay is coming on as my co-host. Welcome, Lindsay. And she is also, shy boy for a second here, one of my listeners, which is a little weird to me, but I'm so excited to talk to you. Welcome, Lindsay, to the How to Podcast series.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. And yes, I'm a listener. As a new podcaster, it has been very beneficial to me. And I highly would recommend anybody and everybody listening out there. Obviously, you're listening to this podcast, so that's good. But to continue and go back to the episodes because they're definitely timely. At least they were, I told you a couple of the points that were really timely for the questions that I had.
Okay, so I'm going to have to ask off the top of the show, like together, what is one thing that you like about the show, and what is one thing that you're like, Dave, could we do something different here, or could we an improvement suggestion? Because I love that, and really I'm willing to listen to any suggestion, and having you here with me makes me so proud and happy. So something that you're enjoying and something maybe you would like me to tweak, because that's meaningful to me.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things I really liked was that you, in the episode that I listened to, one of the most recent ones that I listened to that really stick out was the question about guests and how you posted the question that you got from the person. So I liked, that piece of it because I think that adds another dynamic to the podcast and being able to, hear somebody else's question and see myself in that person having that same question was super great.
Nice.
I enjoyed that. And I don't know that I am far enough into podcasting to say there's anything that I would have you do differently at this point.
Okay.
So yeah, I enjoy it. I would recommend anybody continue to listen to it. And like I told you, I've passed it on already to others.
Okay. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. And the opportunity, as a podcaster to sit and talk with a listener one-on-one is rare, right? because we record, we use these microphones, we send our voice into the world, and you wonder who's listening and who's on the other end, and if the podcast is hitting or helping. So it's great. It's great to have you here, by the way. So I'm really excited about our conversation, and thank you for your feedback. I appreciate that. So one of the things in your comment there was about getting that feedback, and we talked about this on other episodes, was I use SpeakPipe on my website, and that's a thing you can add to your website. Very simple. It's free. Another good thing. And people can then record on your website directly. You can even email them the link, and they can respond via email with a recording. They get 90 seconds to record. You can edit as many times as you want. So it's not like you make a mistake and it goes out into the world. You don't like it, you can re-record. But you get 90 seconds to record a message. It shows up in your inbox as an email. They'll send you a link to go listen to it, or you can directly download it right from your email. And then what I do is I take that file and bring it into my podcast. So my guest, my question from my listener becomes content for me, and then I get to answer it. So one of the things I've done is I'll bring the question in and use it and answer it in an episode, and then I create a bonus episode outside of my numbered episodes. So number 52, 53, 54. Right. Then I do a bonus episode that has no number attached, and I do an episode about my listener and their question. I again replay their question. I grab the trailer from their podcast. I talk about their podcast, promote their podcast on my show, and they get their own bonus episode. So it's just for them, right?
I really like that idea because I direct a lot of people that I talk to, or in my social media that I post, I direct people to my website. So I would love for that to be more functional. For the podcast, right? So I have the link where you can listen to the podcasts there. And then I have some other stuff, but if they're already on that page, to be able to click that and leave a message or a comment or whatever that might be, just seems such a one-stop shop, right? Yeah,
exactly. And it increases engagement. And then the one person, Rachel, I did that for her. And then she left me another message after her bonus episode came out. And Lindsay, when she called back on you SpeakPipe again, she was laughing and crying at the same time that somebody would actually do that for her. And she was just blown away. And for me, I want to be authentic. I want to be the same person that meets and talks to you here, or if we met out in public or at an event. I'm the same guy that comes to every episode that you see here. That's, I think, the one thing that I love to see in podcasting is real people and real engagement, and supporting others. That's really the point of this podcast. So I love that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the more engagement that you can get, and that's something that I wanted to ask you about and talk about, was engagement in other ways to get people engaged into our podcasts and into our brands and into the things that we're doing. SpeakPipe is obviously one of those, but what are some of the other ways that you've engaged people to come to this podcast or come to other podcasts that you have?
Great. I love that. So for me, I'll put it back to you for a second. Where is your most engaged audience? What social media platform?
Great question. Currently, I would say I'm doing most of my engagement on LinkedIn. I actually have hired somebody to do engagement for me, just to kind of get more people coming to my personal site though. So I have a separate site for my podcast. So right now, I don't even know if this is a very good strategy, but I think, as podcasters or as people out in the world, that's probably our main place we go to, right? Is we want people to come to us especially when I'm branding myself as a brand. So I'm there. However, I think most of my audience, and probably a better place to do engagement, is LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great location.
But I, for some reason, am nervous to put it out on LinkedIn for some reason. And maybe that's because I know my audience is there, and maybe I'm waiting to become a more fluid podcaster before I actually put it out there. But it is something that I'm going to step outside of my box and do a little bit more of, because I do think it's important to be on those platforms where your audience is, right? So I think I'm kind of hiding here in Instagram a little bit, but so I'm in the safety profession. I'm a OSHA compliance safety consultant. So that's typically where LinkedIn is. We've had some good engagement on Instagram from other like construction people and other industries, but really the people doing the work that I can actually like see and know and connect with, it seems clearer to me that would be LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Are you speaking on behalf of the organization, or are you speaking on your own?
So I am my own organization.
Okay.
So I'm I work for myself. I have my own company.
Okay.
So yeah. So it's me as a brand, as a company.
Yeah. So I know for me on LinkedIn, I will bring in episodes directly linked into my LinkedIn. So people can actually participate that way and see that. And I guess the biggest thing is just to surround yourself with a community that you think you could serve, right? So through LinkedIn, obviously you're going to find people that would fit for your ideal listener, and you can start a conversation with them, and they will obviously be checking out your profile and seeing who you are and what you do, but just adding value and joining a conversation wherever the conversation is a great way to participate without selling your podcast, right? You're the expert in the room answering questions or participating in the conversation at events when we're allowed to do events out there in the world, and whatever you can do to draw people back to your podcast as a source of opening the conversation is a great way to do that. And the other thing I like about Instagram, for example, is instead of typing messages to people, I use audio messages because I'm a podcaster and my voice is what most people would identify with more than my typing ability. So I like to leave voice messages because they're hard to ignore as well. When you look in your messages and there's a play button, you're like, what is this? So you hit play, you're like, oh, what's going on? So I find that to be a very engaging way of connecting with people that's different than what everyone else is doing. And that opens a door, I think.
Yeah. And it's setting yourself apart, and someone will remember that. Someone will remember, oh, this is, this voice message that I got is from Dave, the How to Podcast series, or whatever, whichever. I know you have many podcasts, but, I do think that really sets apart. I do have somebody that's left me voice messages on my Facebook Messenger. And the other day I tried to leave her a voicemail message in return, and you got to be quick about it. And I wasn't very quick about it, but I do like that, because in this world where there's so many things that, are trying to get our attention, doing those little pieces that separate us and stand us apart is a brilliant idea.
There's so much automation where you're really wondering, is this Lindsay talking to me, or is this some kind of bot or something? But if I come on and I'm like, hey, Lindsay, thank you for the follow here on Instagram. I would love for you to come over and check out the podcast and let me know what you think. What's your favorite episode? And I'd love to talk about that. It's like, that's Dave talking to me. That's not, hi, listener. Right? Yeah.
Message.
It's something for me, and that's different than everybody else. And I guess the one thing that I look at and each of my podcasts is I build my podcasts one listener at a time. I'm not looking to get 100,000 listens in a week. I'm looking at one person every day, every episode. So if I have an interview, I have a new connection with somebody that I can now work on and grow and invest and help you whatever way I can. But we have a new relationship here. And this is how you build a podcast. And I keep talking about celebrating the small. Don't think having a small audience is a bad thing. A small audience means that you can respond to messages. You can respond to speak pipes. You can respond to emails because your group is small. So celebrate the smallness and just grow your community one person at a time. And it takes time.
100%. And I think community is like your point there about having a smaller community, being able to engage with them, because that's what's going to build that community. That's going to be the thing that really connects the group, right? Yeah. So if it is too big, if it grows too fast, too quick, then you do lose that personal touch, and you're not able to potentially respond to all of that. So I do resonate with that. And I think there's so much value in not putting pressure on, oh, I have to have this many listeners, or it has to be this big at this moment. Let it be authentic and just grow naturally. Yeah. At least that's where I'm coming from. I know I assume not. There are people out there that want to just grow super fast and get the numbers, but I do, similar to you, want an authentic community, because that's why I started podcasting. That's why I started to put myself in this position where I can be a platform and build the community that maybe not that I'm missing, but that there's a message that I want to share, and I think others want to hear it. And this is so this is the community that I want to build.
Awesome. So we haven't even mentioned your podcast yet. Can you tell everybody the name of your podcast and a little bit about it as well?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for asking. So my podcast is called The Safety Gambit, and it's about the risks that we take at home and at work and the safety culture we build as a result of that. So I feel like there's a big disconnect between sometimes management and our worker bees. There's a lot of risk taking, and you may be in a position that your company is taking risks that you don't want to take, but because you're there, you might take those risks, or you might be put in a situation that you're taking a risk, and you're not comfortable with it, or you're making a choice to take a risk, knowing all the different factors. And then that creates a safety culture at home and at work. And we can no longer silo workplace from our home life. There's definitely a work integration. There's no more balance. I don't think there's a thing of work-life balance anymore. There's never a 50-50. So we have to integrate those two. And so as we show up as our whole selves to our home life or our work life, we are creating a culture of safety around that. And I want to add fuel to that fire, so to speak, to really talk about people's risk tolerances and why we take the risks, and just have a lot of conversation around that. And I might not have all the answers or whatnot, but I don't think my podcast is designed to have all the answers. I think my podcast is designed to share information, talk to people about the risks that they take in their life, whether that's work or home, and then what culture that is what safety culture they're finding themselves in now, and if they want to shift that to, a different safety culture.
Awesome. So what is the format for your podcast? Is it interview-based, solo hosted? Can you talk about that too?
Yeah, so both. Okay. I have a couple of solo episodes out already. I'm a newer podcast, so I launched December 15th, and it comes out bi-weekly. And I have solo episodes as well as interviews. So looking for people to interview that just, have a passion for total worker health, which is a term that is, I would say, resurfacing, and looking at, again, how all of this stuff integrates. So I'll do some education, and my podcast has 4 pillars. The human aspect of safety. So all of the podcasts will fall under one of the categories or one of the pillars. So community, education and skills, environment, and well-being.
Wow. Okay. So I love how you have us all nailed down. First of all, that's amazing. I had somebody reach out to me and they said,
thank you for thinking
somebody reached out to me and they said, I have the mic. I have all the stuff, all the gear. Dave, what should I podcast about? And I'm like, oh boy. Wow, maybe we need to kind of back up a little bit, because we need something to talk about and be passionate about. And what you have, you bring expertise to it. It's a great connection with your business and what you do. It opens the door as a business card into the business world, into the safety world, to be that expert, So, wow. So some suggestions for you. And I heard somebody else do this. They had a podcast in a similar nature as what you would have in a different part of business, they went out to one of their local popular conventions and asked if they could be the voice of the convention through the podcast. And if I could have a booth at your convention. So you have all your vendors lined up, and then there's Lindsay and the podcast. And they just said to the host, to the people putting the show on, I would love to come and I'll do a podcast about the event. I'll interview your vendors. I'll interview your speakers, and I will be the voice for your event. What do you think? And so they said yes. So the podcaster got access to every guest speaker. We're all experts. They all became guests on their podcast. She got to talk to all the vendors, who some in turn wanted to sponsor the podcast, which is pretty cool. And she made connections with an audience and was able to hand out little stickers or little business cards for their podcast, and got a whole new group of listeners just by being a vendor, quote unquote, in the vendor group for this event. Wow.
That's an amazing suggestion. Yeah, there's in the world of health and safety, industrial hygiene, there's definitely local meetings and joint symposiums. So that would be, there's one in October. They usually have it in October. They're probably starting to plan for it soon. That's a great idea, because again, those are where my ideal audience is sitting.
Right.
So by having that booth and having the ability to, hey, come over here and tell me about, what you're here to speak about, or what are you learning at this conference, being able to have that, and build rapport that way as a speaker, I can see is absolutely beneficial to, the podcast and the brand.
And maybe even the event promoter who's putting on the event could give you an access code for your listeners to save money off their ticket. And then the promoter then will see who's coming to the show because of your podcast. And then it's like,
That's
use
awesome.
my coupon code, podcast. And then the event planner's like, look at all these people that signed up under the event code podcast. Lindsay's killing it. Let's do more work with Lindsay. So
yeah, that's a great idea. I love that idea. Thanks for
sharing. There you go. So that kind of stuff is great because we're getting into your community, right? And building that. One question we were talking about before we hit record was all around guesting, and some questions around guesting and finding guests for your podcast and all that kind of stuff. What kind of stuff are you dealing with right now that you have questions about?
Well, I think the big thing, I feel a little paralyzed sometimes in trying to ask somebody to be a guest. It's almost like, I feel like it's dating. I feel like I'm dating the podcast world or something, right? Like we need to go out and be like, hey, hi, I'm so-and-so. And I'm Lindsay and I have this podcast. It's called The Safety Gambit. Want to be on it? So I don't want to be too, excited and jumpy by it. So, some of the advice that you had given on your previous episode was be a part of that community, message, respond, interact. And for whatever reason, it's almost like I knew that, but then to hear it again, it was like, okay, step back, cool my jets. It'll come naturally. And it really has. So I think, I recently joined a new society. It's called the Society of Total Worker Health. And a woman reached out to me and we did a meet and greet. And I think she would be awesome for the podcast. And so I did mention it. I thought it was a little premature, but I did mention it. So we're going to have a follow-up meeting to talk more, get to know each other. So I do feel like it's a little bit like dating. What do you think?
Yes, it is. And you need to know, you have to go where your dates might be, right? Again, going to about the community part for the listeners, same thing for guests. So a couple suggestions. I like going to Amazon and look up new authors on the topic of my podcast. So for you, health and safety, whatever, and look for new book releases. Guess who wants to promote their book? An author with a new book release. And if they are an author in your topic, all of their contact information's there. You can ask them to come on to talk about their book and then focus on the topic of their book, right, as the main content. But then obviously mention the book, promote the book. You can link to the book through an Amazon affiliate program is something you can sign up for as a business owner. And then you get a small percentage of money every time somebody buys the book. That's a great opportunity for you to have income after the podcast episode goes out. 1, 2, 10 years from now, somebody will use your link. You get a little bit of money back, which is great. But you get to find, if you sort by relevance, like release date, you'll find the most up-to-date book on your topic. You don't really want something that's maybe 40 years old, 20 years old, right? You want something recent. So, but these are authors that are...
There's a lot of old books on safety.
Yes. Don't stick your finger in the electrical socket. Done. Got it. Good. But you're going to find authors that are looking to promote their work and looking for podcasts. So there's a great thing there for them to come on your show. The other one would be to look at other podcasts in your niche, in your niche. Usually what happens is if I have a guest, I put all their information, all their contact information. And if you listen to the podcast and you like the guest and you think they would add value to your show, there's no harm in reaching out saying, listen, I heard you on XYZ podcast. That was a fabulous podcast episode. I really loved when you talked about 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So that means you actually listen and you're talking to the guests now, right? Would you ever consider coming on my podcast? Because I would love to talk about this part of your story. So you're vetting through someone else and using their network to help grow your network. It's always a great option.
Okay, so a follow-up question to that is, have you gotten, it may is just a preconceived notion being a new podcast that, you know, are people going to, I love the author idea because they feel like they want to get their information out, you know, anybody listening is great, you know, right? Have you encountered anything with people saying, well, how many followers or how much, you know, what's your community for your podcast? You know, we're pretty small here at the Safety Gambit still. But what are your thoughts on that? Okay.
So I reached out. I have an author podcast called Living the Next Chapter. It was 1 year old on February 4th this year. So in that podcast, I have 157 episodes in a year. And they're all interviews, right? And at the very beginning, I had 0 guests. So one of my first people that I reached out to was an author in California. And I had purchased his book on Audible and listened to it, and I loved it. So I had to go through his people for the first initial contact, and then they sent me to him. And he came on, and he's looking at me because we've never met. And I always like to do pre-interviews, by the way. So I don't just go right to recording. So I had a pre-interview with him, and that was one of his first questions. Like, David, tell me your numbers. And I said, well, my podcast, I have maybe 2 episodes, and they're solo episodes. I haven't had an interview yet. And he kind of looked at me kind of like, you know, I'm a professional. I speak a lot, and my time is really important. But I said to him, I can promise you this, that I will give you the best episode you've ever been on. I said, I listened to you on this other episode on another podcast, and this is what happened. So he was being interviewed by a host, okay, and he was in the middle of saying his response to a question. And during his response, as the guest, the host did this. Oh, just 1 second. Yeah. Oh. And he got on his phone. The host got on his phone, took a phone call, while the guest is sitting there looking around like, what is going on? Finished the phone call on his phone, put the phone down, and then said, okay, next question. Didn't even let him finish his answer. And I said to him, I want to apologize to you on behalf of podcast hosts, because that was not a good moment. And he looked at me and he said, Dave, I don't care about your numbers. When can we sign this up? So
it's the engagement. You would listen to him and you had seen something and you could relate. So what I'm hearing you say for those of us who want to go that route is, you know, or as we're reaching out, do your research, right? Yeah. Find out where these people have been, if they've spoken before, listen, and then be relatable, right? Like I'd want to have somebody connect with me that's relatable or knows a little bit about me or, you know, whatnot. So that's a great example.
Yeah. So, and then in our recording, I brought out things that he said in his book. And about 3 times during the recording, he sat back and said, I can't believe you read my book. I can't. Okay. Yeah, let's go down this topic. And then I asked him another one. He's like, you're just throwing these across the plate. I'm just, wow. Like he was totally blown away that someone took the time to do the background work to make a good episode. And so from there, after we were done recording, he was like, David, he said, I wasn't sure at first how this would go, but that was amazing. I'm going to share this with my network. And I'm like, thank you. Thanks. And that's all it took.
Like, I followed through with my promise. Best episode ever.
Be a real person. That's all.
Yeah.
Treat people with respect, honor their time, don't waste their time, promote as you can, and give them a great experience. So one of my questions I ask all of my guests in a pre-interview chat is, listen, Lindsay, I heard you on all these 5 other podcasts. Great work, by the way. Love your content. I noticed that you're getting asked similar questions on these other shows. So those are all things in your content library that you've already answered those questions. Great. I would love to give you the opportunity to talk about something different in addition to all of these things you already have in your library. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to go deeper on? What would serve you? And the look in their eyes are like, well, I've never got a chance to talk about A, B, and C. I'm like, good. Let's do that. So you know what, by doing that, what I've just solidified with my guest is I'm going to go on Dave's podcast and talk about something I've never talked about before. And I'm going to share it because I've never shared this with my community before.
But again, you're being relatable to them and you're setting yourself apart by not doing the same old thing that they've done for the other podcasts that they've been on. So you're doing your research, being able to connect with that human, like the human side. And that's, something that the whole Safety Gambit's about being human in this world of risks and safety. So that definitely is a good approach to being human to the others when asking and researching and seeking out guests.
So one of the things I hear back from other podcasters is they struggle asking their guests to share the show after they've been on. And it's like, I don't know how to ask or my guest never shares my shows. And I feel so disappointed because I would love for them to be in contact with their audience. Or I'm really proud of the episode. I want people to hear it. But my guests, they don't share. So my question back is, did you give them an interview worth sharing? Something different, something new that they would be proud to share with their community. But if you've done a photocopy of the last 5 episodes on other shows, do they really want to share the same story again? I don't know. Right. So let's give them something different.
Yeah. That's such valuable guidance because we do want guests to share. I do have a guest primer that I send out and I do ask that they share, but I mean, that's about all I do. That's about all that we can do is ask them to share. And then it is up to them to share with their network if they do. The episode coming out this week is somebody that has a big following. She's had her own podcast, all this stuff. And so, I did give her a heads up, because we record in advance. And so I told her I'd give her a heads up when it was going. And so she just responded and was like, thanks so much. And so I know that she's at least engaged and now expecting it to come out instead of just like not blindsiding her because it was a good interview, but just, being courteous of, this is going to pop up and I'm going to tag you in it. And here we go.
Smart.
Yeah.
Smart. I love it. So, okay, one thing you mentioned too, for those busy podcasters who are trying to juggle their business, their home life, family, and a podcast, I just don't have enough time in my day. From your perspective, what kind of things are you looking for outside help with or have secured outside help with so that you can do your podcast and do life in a healthy balance?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that I would share with anybody and share with you out there who want to start a podcast is resource, find the resources that you're not good at for the things that you're not good at or don't want to do. So I initially, when I had this vision of I want to do a podcast, I think I thought about it for a long time and didn't know how to go about it. I had a friend who said, here is somebody who is a consultant for, helping people start podcasts. So I thought, yes, because I won't do this if I don't have somebody mentoring me or providing accountability just to like get going. And initially I thought, okay, this person will help me just, get the right equipment and figure out how to record, and then they'll edit it. But in fact, it was a mentorship. So we had many conversations ahead of time to really set up how many episodes do I already have in my mind, instead of going into it and saying, okay, now I have, because I think if you're starting a podcast and you don't have 20, 30 ideas of what your episodes could be, it'll be really stressful. Like I have a list and I'm still stressing out. I have a couple of episodes in the bank, but I'm still stressing out a little bit of, recording and doing that. So having that mentor up front was critical to my success of launching. And it probably took us 6 months to launch, but it was nice to be able to think everything through, write it down. The guidance that I got from that outside perspective was instrumental. And so he was a mentor, and he also edits my stuff. So I just have to record and send him the recording. I picked music and he puts it together. So beautiful. That was an outside resource that I invested in. And it wasn't even that much money. So I think that people can, that you can do this low cost still with having a resource to help you get going and get it off the ground and support you each episode.
Nice. That's great, because I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with the how-to part of how to start a podcast, right? And they're just like, there's so much to know. Sure. There's so much, but there's tools and there's people out there to help you. So that's awesome. I love that. What about, the other thing we talked about was just building that audience and growing your audience. Any thoughts and suggestions on what you're doing or what you're thinking about doing for your podcast?
Yeah. So I was so focused on getting my podcast just record. I was so stressing about recording that at some point, about a month out of the launch, I thought, I have no marketing. I don't know how people are going to even know about this. So I did pull in a social media manager who set me up for launch. So was able to give me some Canva graphics and, make my graphics for solo episodes and guest episodes. So now I just need to edit those and put the pictures in and change the titles. Then I can post those on social media. So I got help with that initial setup, and they did also give me a calendar for, essentially 30 days out of what to be posting and how to get people talking about it through my social media. So having that additional support, because I knew I needed it, but again, I'm not savvy on making the Canva templates or it's just not something I find enjoyable either, So being able to find somebody that could support me in that was awesome. And then from there, I also have somebody, because my Instagram account up till about 20 days before I launched my podcast was private. I didn't want all the crazy, all the just people just joining because they just want to join, my Instagram. So I had to open that up. I changed it to business. And then I've hired somebody also to do engagement. Again, something that I don't necessarily enjoy, and told myself that I would invest in somebody to do this. And again, not super expensive. So worth the investment to me, like my time, because then I can spend my time recording or coming up with new ideas instead of having to, I do go back in and I'll see what she's engaged in and I'll respond as well. But it's like she's kickstarted it for me.
Nice. Yeah. Great ideas.
What do you do?
I love it. For me, I am doing, for all 7 shows, I do the websites, I do all the social media, I do all the editing, I do everything. So, and that part of the reason for that is I want to be able to offer similar services in the future to help people. So that's kind of my long-term game plan. I don't have any commercials in my podcasts or nothing like that. So I'm not sponsored by anyone. I'm paying for this all by myself. So I want to give my listening audience a good experience without the commercial for a bed or a herbal supplement or anything. I'm not doing any of that stuff. So my wife would love for me to make money from my podcast. I would love to take my wife out for dinner because of my podcast. That would be a future goal for me, is to spoil my wife, as she's been very patient with me doing all these things. But I'm at a different stage in my life right now with my kids are all grown and we're empty nesters. So I have a little bit more time in my calendar. Mm-hmm. So please don't, if you're a single parent at home, juggling work, family, and wanting a podcast, and you're looking at or listening to this conversation going, I can't do that. Well, no, that's not the idea. But to find inspiration and find out what you can do and do that. I talked to a guest yesterday and they said they gave up on their podcast because they thought they had to release every week and they couldn't keep up as a single mom. And so they stopped. But the story that they were sharing could help so many people. And I said to them, you don't have to release every week. It's nice if you can, but you don't have to. I said, you can release once a month if you want to, whenever the content is ready. Your audience cares about you. Your audience wants to see you succeed, and they'll be there for you no matter how your release schedule is. She's like, what, you mean I don't have to release every week? I'm like, you can see the release on her shoulders. Like
you just gave her permission.
Wow. Yeah. I'm like, just do what you can when you can. Right.
Yeah.
And your audience will love you for it. So it's nice to have that message.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm fortunate. So I work, I have my own company. I'm a consultant on my own. And so I am fortunate to have been able to build my business enough where I can spend on these resources. But I will say, there's a lot of people out there, and that would mentor. Just finding the accountability and a mentor that can continue supporting you on your path. Because if you see value in the message that you have to share, then you have the knowledge. Now you have to really put the value together. And then how do you get that value to action is through accountability and community. So yeah, like you said, launch once a month if you've got a message, take the time that you need to, use the free tools out there and be able to record and then edit. And, I know many people that have done it all on their own. And so it is definitely possible to do with your, plug in headphones to your computer and a program on the screen, on the computer. Off you go. So
off you go. Yeah.
It's,
It's great. Okay. So anything else? I think we kind of ran through some of the questions we had talked about for today. Anything else come to mind that you would like to chat about before we run?
I don't know. I feel like we covered a lot of good topics.
I know,
we
right?
Scratched the surface on all of them. So maybe we'll have to come back sometime and do a deep dive on some of, on any one of these. But I do think, in summary, if you have a calling on your heart to do a podcast, and for me, it was that I felt like I have a message, and through speaking is the way that I wanted to share that message. And podcasting seemed like a really good way to do that. And like you had mentioned, it's a great way to meet community. It's getting me out there, meeting more people in my profession, since that's what I'm podcasting around. But it's guiding me to meet more people and be in community with those who are like-minded and like-hearted. And so it took a long time for me to decide, okay, I'm going to do it, because then the resource fell to me and was like, here, I can help you. And I was like, yes, help me. But I think if you have a calling, just to do it. And Dave, this series of How to Podcast, what you have put together, I think somebody could start it literally from the beginning. And because you start with, how to come up with the title, or how to, what's your format? What is that going to be? So you have so many basics already within this podcast in and of itself that if somebody wants to start from the beginning, you can literally start and go through these episodes and really pull it together. and launch your own
Yeah.
podcast.
I love it. Thank you for the feedback. I love that. And
You're
again,
already
it's not
mentoring,
about
Dave. You're doing it.
Yeah, see? There you go. And it's not about the microphone. It's not about all those things that people get hung up on. Just share your message and grow, right? That's the big thing. You can always grow into it. And then if you want to upgrade in the future, awesome. We got lots of ways you can upgrade, but don't let that stop you from sharing your message. Don't let
100%.
publishing every week stop you from sharing your message with the world. Let's alleviate all those concerns and get you out there in front of people, because people need to hear your voice. And for your podcast in particular, we want everyone to go to work and come home safe every single day. So your podcast is super important. Your podcast can actually save a life. That's huge, huge. So I love that.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So plug away. We're going to leave, but plug away the website, contact information for you. I know people loved your comments about finding great people to support you, and they want to reach out to your contacts. How do people get in touch with you? Through LinkedIn and then also through your website?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that opportunity. So my name again is Lindsay Polic. My website is a great place to learn more about me, learn about my technical skills, and also podcast page. Okay, so my website is lindsaypolic.com. So LindsayPolic.com. And then you can always email me. And my email is my first name, Lindsay, Lindsay at lindsaypolic.com. So that's a great way to reach out to me. I am on Instagram at Lindsay_Polic. So that's Polic. It's definitely, it should be like a Pollock or something, but it's a soft C there. And then I also have a Instagram for my podcast on Instagram called @TheSafetyGambit. And feel free to join that and follow the conversation. My podcast is The Safety Gambit. It can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also listen to it on my website as well.
Awesome. So Lindsay, who would you be a good guest for if somebody says, I would love to have Lindsay on my show? Who would be, what kind of show would you like to go on?
Oh, another great question. So since I talk about risk taking and also, risk taking outside of work, inside of work, anybody that wants to talk about just, work-life integration. Like I said, my 4 pillars are community, education, skills, environment, and well-being. So any of those kind of topics that really relate to the workplace, and like if you're talking about the frustrations that people feel at work around safety, how to be safe, not being safe, I would love to talk to people like that. I don't know that there's too many podcasts out there that talk safety, but also just mindfulness, about showing up to work with a good headspace. Because I think that that's really, if we're not in a good headspace, that's where we end up taking risks. So if you're talking anything about mindset around being at work or being in a position that is challenging, I'd love to share tools and tips that I have found to work for me and others.
Awesome. So any kind of business podcast, human resource podcast, any of those ones would be perfect for you to come on as a guest.
Well, yes. Well summarized. Thank you.
Yes. And also, who would you want as a guest? If somebody's listening going, I'd love to come on Lindsay's show. Who are you looking for as a guest?
Yeah, I've been thinking I want to do something like a series of industry people. So maybe a construction person or somebody like a firefighter or a police officer, a nurse. I have potentially a nurse coming on, but somebody in industry. I recently interviewed somebody that works on the East Coast in transportation, ferry, toll booths, freeway, Coast Guard, all these different regulations within transportation. So I'd love to be able to talk to industry people about the risks that they take within their jobs and where they could see a need to shift the safety culture.
Awesome. So we'll have all the links in the show notes to connect with Lindsay. If you think you're a great guest for her or you want Lindsay on your show, it's going to be great. Reach out to Lindsay. She's an awesome person. I completely recommend that you reach out, and she'll bring so much amazingness to your podcast. Thank you so much for being part of
Thanks so
our
much, Dave.
co-hosted show. You're always welcome back, okay?
Thanks so much.
Anytime.
I would love to come back.
Anytime. All right?
All right.
I have a
Perfect.
when's your next episode come out?
It actually they come out every other Thursday.
Okay.
So, yeah. So
Beautiful. Well, I'll be listening.
Thursday.
I'll be listening.
Great. Thank
It's
you.
great. Thank you so much.